All right, welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to demystify two concepts that are absolutely essential if you want your data to be trustworthy and secure: access control and data lineage. Let's dive right in. So, let's kick things off with a pretty big question. We all know an organization's data is this incredible asset, right? But here's the thing. Without proper management, it can flip and become a massive liability fast. Just imagine a library with no rules, no records, and no librarian. It's just pure chaos. So, how in the world do we bring some order to this data library? Well, it's not about one single magic bullet. You actually need two guardians, two pillars, really, that have to work together to build trust from the ground up. Let's go meet them. Okay, our first guardian is the librarian, or what we call access control. This pillar is all about setting the rules, deciding who gets a library card, which sections they're allowed to go into, and what they can even do when they're in there. It's the who and the what. And then you've got the second guardian, the archivist. We call this one data lineage. And this pillar, well, it's kind of obsessed with history. It keeps this perfect, unbroken record of every single piece of information's entire journey. Where did it come from, how did it change, and where did it end up? This is the where and the how. So here's the main takeaway, the thing you have to remember. Access control is the gatekeeper, standing at the door, protecting the data. At the same time, data lineage is the detective, giving you the complete history and the proof you need to actually trust that the data is solid. You absolutely need both. Okay, let's zoom in a bit on our first pillar. How exactly does our gatekeeper, access control, manage all the rules for this massive data library? The mission here goes way beyond just stopping hackers. It's really about protecting sensitive personal info, letting teams collaborate securely, and, this is a big one, meeting some serious legal standards like GDPR in Europe or HIPAA for healthcare data in the US. It is the absolute foundation for security and compliance. So this gatekeeper uses a few different rulebooks. The most common one you'll see is Role-Based Access Control, or RBAC. It's pretty straightforward. You get access based on your job, like an analyst versus an admin. But you can get way more specific. Attribute-based, or ABAC, looks at stuff like your department or region, and policy-based, PBAC, uses complex rules, which is super important for enforcing things like GDPR. And check this out. This is a perfect example of how it actually works. This simple line of code creates something called row-level security. It's basically a rule that says, hey, when a user queries this data, only show them the rows that match their specific region. It's a super precise, automated way to enforce the rules without having to build tons of separate tables. Pretty cool, right? Okay, that's the gatekeeper. Now let's bring in our second pillar, the detective, data lineage. How do we trace the entire story of a piece of data from the very beginning to the very end? Data lineage is really all about answering those critical whodunit questions. The ones you need for troubleshooting, for audits, and for building trust. If a number on some report just looks wrong, Lineage can tell you exactly where the mistake happened and why. And this visual, it lays out that journey perfectly. A piece of data often starts out as raw input. We call that the bronze stage. Then it gets cleaned up and validated, moving to the silver stage. And finally, it gets aggregated for analytics. That's the gold stage, right before it shows up in a dashboard. Data lineage is the map that tracks its path through every single step. And believe me, the payoff for all this detective work is huge. With a clear history, you can fix problems in minutes, not days. You can walk up to an auditor and prove compliance with total confidence. And you can see the downstream impact of any changes before you make them and break something important. It just saves time, cuts down on risk, and builds a ton of trust. So what actually happens when the gatekeeper and the detective finally start working together? Well, that's when you transform that chaotic, risky library into a world-class trusted hub of information. And hey, this isn't just some abstract theory. I mean, just look at these industries. In healthcare, access control is what protects patient privacy by masking sensitive data. In banking, data lineage gives them that unbreakable audit trail for every single financial transaction. It's totally fundamental to how modern business works. Now, if you want to do this right, there are a few key things to remember. For access control, the number one rule is the principle of least privilege, which just means you always grant the absolute bare minimum access someone needs to do their job and nothing more. And you should always operate like you can't trust any request by default. That's the heart of a zero-trust approach. And for Lineage, Being successful means documenting everything in a central catalog, visualizing the data flows, and using open standards like Open Lineage. Seriously, think of Open Lineage as a common language that lets all your different data tools talk to each other so they can build one single unified map of your data's journey.
And you've got to know, this whole field is moving fast. Soon, AI will be suggesting access policies for you automatically. Lineage will become this live, real-time graph. And if you look a little further out, ideas like the data mesh are going to totally flip things around. Instead of one central team managing all the data, ownership gets pushed out to the expert teams who actually know the data best.
But in the end, it really all comes down to this. These two are the foundational pillars of modern data governance. Access control is your shield. It protects the data from being misused. But data lineage, that's what gives you the proof, the transparency, and the confidence you need to actually use that data.
So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a question to think about for your own company. Your data is constantly telling a story, but do you know who's holding the pen? Because understanding that story and knowing who has the power to change it, that's the first and most critical step toward real security and trust.